Hi everyone. I think this is the last presentation, so hopefully you can bear with me. Again, my name is Seisha Mehta. I'm an 11th grader at Hawken High School, and I did this as a study for my STEM project over the summer. And I'd like to acknowledge my co-investigators, Dr. James Young and Dr. Neil Mehta. There were no conflicts of interest during this trial. So basically, it is generally known that the assessment of functional capacity for patients with heart failure by clinicians is quite subjective. And particularly, it has been shown when distinguishing between NYHA Class 2 and Class 3, the concordance between two cardiologists is just a little bit better than chance. And furthermore, patients struggle to self-assess their own functional capabilities. For example, when patients' self-reported walk distance has virtually no correlation with cardiopulmonary exercise testing. And this has huge implications for research. Almost no research paper describes the method of assigning NYHA classification. And this is really problematic because NYHA classification is key in determining medications and specific medical devices such as defibrillators for patients, and we don't want to inappropriately judge this. So currently, wearable devices are available for personal use, and data collected by these devices have potential for huge clinical implications. For example, daily walking performance is a clear determinant on the functional capacity in patients with heart failure, and namely, reduction in weekly pedometer scores is actually a strong predictor of death in patients with heart failure. So we wanted to, in this study, see if the data collected by the Microsoft band will impact the cardiologist's impression of the functional capacity of their patients. In this study, the objectives were the following. First was to study perceptions of treating cardiologists regarding the potential usefulness of wearable device data in the evaluation of their own patients. Secondly, to study the impact of this data on assigning an NYHA class. And third, to study patient perceptions on the use of wearable device data by their own treating cardiologists. In the study, we saw consecutive patients at the Cleveland Clinic Heart Failure Center between July and August of this year. And each patient had access to a smartphone, and each patient was approached by their own cardiologist at the time of the regularly scheduled office visit. What we did was we provided each patient with a Microsoft band and a de-identified Microsoft account. And they were then monitored for up to 2 weeks regarding activity, sleep, heart rate, and calories. And this data was then transmitted onto the Microsoft Health dashboard and then shared with their treating clinician. And each clinician and each patient completed a survey. We had 25 patients enrolled and 6 cardiologists enrolled. Out of that, 23 patients were able to finish the fitness tracking period. 16 patients have completed the survey so far. 6 cardiologists have completed the main survey, and so far cardiologists have reviewed the data of 13 of the patients. So this is just sort of a screenshot of what the cardiologist would be able to see when seeing their patient's data. You can see the number of steps that were taken, the number of calories that were burned, the number of hours that the patient was able to sleep, and also if they did any exercise. So they could see if they went on about a 2.5 mile run. And again, this is a sample summary of what a healthy person's data would look like. They could also see the number of daily steps. You can see that on the upper corner. And then also the weekly step patterns, so they can get more of an overall image of how many steps their patient is walking in a week. They also are able to see sleep patterns, and how this works is that they're able to see the number of hours they slept. The red indicates times that the patient has woken up. The light purple is sort of light sleep, and the dark purple is deep sleep. And I'd be lucky to get anything like that this year. And then they also get to see their weekly sleep pattern. And physicians actually found this to be one of the most helpful slides because they're able to see how their patient's doing throughout the whole entire week. And they can also see what time they're going to bed and what time they're waking up each day. And lastly, they're also able to see the number of active hours they have, and this is indicated by the purple bars. And this basically means that the patient's able to walk more than 600 steps in an hour. So as for the results, the cardiologists were asked to respond to how useful this data would be. out of a 3-point scale, and unanimously all of them found them useful. The majority found it very useful, and the rest found it at least somewhat useful. Out of the 13 cases, and 8 of the cases, the data was able to influence the clinical opinion. 3 physicians found that their patients were in worse condition than they expected, 2 thought they were better than they expected, and 2 confirmed the suspicions that they had about their patients. What was also found was a sleep pattern was a huge contribution to the functional status, and the clinicians really liked having that this information was available. Out of the 13 cases, 5 of the cases, the data changed the NYHA classification. So 2 physicians moved their patients from class 3 to class 2, 1 of them moved them from class 2 to class 1, and 2 of them moved them from class 2 to class 3. And clinicians also said they would like to see the data at the time of their office visit, and they were just concerned regarding the time required to monitor this data in between visits. As for the patients' results, the patients were asked to gauge how useful their own data would be to their treating clinician on a 4-point scale. And overwhelmingly, most of them found it very, very helpful, and the others found it somewhat helpful, with a very small percentage saying that it would not be helpful at all. They were also asked how comfortable they were sharing this data with their physician over the internet. And interestingly enough, even though that the majority found it very useful, there was about 1/8 of the population that found that they would be very uncomfortable sharing this information with their physician. The patients also said that most of them would wear this device almost every day if they had it, and then most of them would wear the device for 23 hours a day. Now to just sort of understand how the physician reacted to the data, I would like to present 2 cases. So the first is a 65-year-old patient with a left ventricular assist device. I pronounced that right, that's great. And what the physician found was that their patient actually walked a surprisingly high number of steps each day, with an average of 3,000 steps. And also he found that the sleep patterns were really, really horrible. So what he concluded was, overall confirmed what I suspected regarding his functional status. What was most revealing was his terrible sleep pattern. Wonder if addressing his sleep problem might improve his functional status. In the second case, it was a 70-year-old patient who had a lot of complaints regarding fatigue and shortness of breath. Similarly, his physician found that he also walked a surprisingly high number of steps each day. And she said, he had a lot of somatic complaints, suspected he was okay, but I was unsure if he was class 2 or class 3, though I was leaning towards class 2. I felt that my clinical judgment was validated through this data, and I would now confidently classify him as class 2. So in conclusion, cardiologists unanimously found this data from the wearable devices to be useful in clinical practice. However, they mentioned that they would like to have this data available at time of the patient visit. Secondly, this data can influence NYHA class assignment with a huge impact on research and practice. And because we found that it could be of such great use, this could help in getting inappropriately diagnosing patients with devices such as defibrillators and other things like this sort. Thirdly, coupling of sleep with activity data might have implications on patient management. And lastly, patients were generally comfortable with sharing this data and with wearing this device. However, we'd like to acknowledge the limitations that this was a small sample and a single center. It was also a single non-FDA approved device in a short study window. But in next steps, we'd like to use a larger study. However, even though we found that it was a unanimous agreement that this device can be very, very helpful in clinical practice, we also feel like there could be a longer window of data gathering, and also to develop hypotheses for building predictive models for adverse events like hospitalizations in the future that we can sort of gauge through patterns that we see in the data.